Hello, welcome to a demo of my first hardware modding project. I call it the Psp Pocket. It's a Raspberry Pi 3 Model B crammed into a Game Boy Pocket that's capable of emulating PSP games, along with previous systems. So we have the full set of D-pad, A, B, X, and Y, left and right analog sticks, L1 and L2, and finally R1 and R2. In the back, I've glued in the shell of a Game Boy cartridge for a little extra internal space. The shoulder buttons I sourced from a TV remote. They're the conductive pads, so no clicking noises. You can see that the microSD slot coincidentally fits well where the battery clip piece used to be, and two LEDs that display the power and activity of the Raspberry Pi. This little button here in the corner is to engage the battery indicator circuit. This first micro USB port is for charging the Adafruit Powerboost 1000C and the original power switch. I modified a splash screen from Raspberry Coolie, and Emulation Station is of course the front end. The systems I've been playing the most are Dreamcast, N64, PlayStation, and PSP. So I want to demonstrate some gameplay beginning with the Dreamcast and Soulcalibur. The Dreamcast emulates really well on the Raspberry Pi 3. Almost all the games I've tested run at full speed. Crazy Taxi is notably a little bit slow, but I'm able to tweak the settings and get better performance. One thing about Dreamcast emulation, and especially on this small 2.2 TFT screen, is most of the fonts are pretty hard to read. It might not show up that great in the video, but I know Soulcalibur has the mission battle system that it's impossible to read the text, so that's kind of a bummer, and it's just on the Dreamcast emulation. Like with PSP games, the font renders much better, much more readable. You can hear the sound coming out. That's from two small mono speakers in the same location as the original Game Boy Pocket, but kind of hugging the outside edge to make room for the analog stick. And as we get the game started, you can see that it runs really, really well. I would say perfectly. And by the way, all the buttons are being interfaced through a Teensy 2.0, which goes into Raspberry Pi via USB. Okay, so that's Dreamcast. Hit the select button to exit the emulator. And let's see what next. How about N64? And we'll take a look at one of my favorite games on the system, actually of all time, which is Super Smash Bros. And before I had the Raspberry Pi 3, I was trying this with the Raspberry Pi 2 and just could never get N64 to run that well. But as soon as I plugged up the Raspberry Pi 3, it was running perfectly. So I'm a pretty big fan of the Pi 3. And let's just test out with Captain Falcon. And this battle doesn't quite go as well as the Soulcalibur battle, but hopefully you can get an idea of what it looks like playing N64 on this device. And before I lose the battle and the rest of my dignity, let's quit that emulator with the start select combination. And finally I want to show you the PSP emulation, which I'm still really impressed that it's even able to run this at a playable rate. So I'm going to demonstrate Burnout Legends. Not all games run on the PSP emulator for RetroPie, but I think the development is still fairly early on. So with that said, I'm impressed it's able to run anything. And Burnout Legends runs extremely well. You can see that 100%, 99.9% up in the top right. I am rendering buffered mode with a frame skip set to 1, which I think is a small price to pay to be able to play these games, quite frankly. And you'll notice that the widescreen format shrinks even smaller, my 2.2-inch screen losing some real estate at the top and bottom. But Overall, everything's very playable. I will say that for Burnout Legends, it makes it extremely difficult to see oncoming traffic before you have a chance to compensate for it. I'll just let this play through a bit so you can see the performance. And again, try not to pay too much attention to my skill. I am running the standalone version of the Psp emulator, which I find performs better than the LibRetro version. And with that comes the little mouse icon in the top left corner, which I haven't figured out how to get rid of. But also with that, for some reason, the circle button or the A button on the Game Boy is not recognized at all by the emulator. And so I've had to map the right analog stick to the face buttons, which also makes first-person shooters on the PSP more natural to play. So I'll show you quickly coded arms for a second to demonstrate that. As you can see, the game does play back mostly at 100% speed. It does seem to take a little more advantage of the frame skip feature, so the playback's a little choppier, but overall still very playable, and especially with 2 analog sticks. So yeah, that's going to be all for the demonstration of my little Psp Pocket. Thanks for watching.